And hello, Hearts of Oak. Thanks so much for joining us once again. And it's great to have James Lindsay giving us his time today. James, thank you as always for your time today.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me.
Always good. And I've been intrigued by some of the conversation online on your posts on the term woke right. And I thought it would be great to have you on to delve a little bit deeper. But of course, people can find you at Conceptual James. There is your X handle and you discourse. All the links are in the description. Please do follow James if you've been asleep and have missed him. So unlikely. But so woke right. Do you want to maybe give us a little bit of an overview? And to me, kind of as a Brit, maybe looking into this conversation on the US side, of course, you take these principles and they're taken across the board. It's not just one nation or one area. It's a belief system or an ideology or an outlook. So it's much wider than that. But yeah, I think you'd put down woke right is a cult, and then you've on to define that. So maybe we can start there. Woke right is a cult.
I mean,
Explain.
and maybe we should start even more simply. I am very curious, though, at some point, after a few minutes, to hear what it looks like from your British perspective looking in. Because, I'm in the trench at this point. So, I see the world not from the sky or from the mountaintop, but from down in the hole. So we'll start a little more simply than even the cult phenomenon. I mean, the cult thing is easy. If we believe that the woke left represents a cult outlook on the world, and if we believe this is a logic test, if is a conditional, if we accept these propositions, if we believe that the woke left phenomenon is a cult phenomenon, and I think most of us do at this point that are critical of it. And we accept that what makes the woke right what it's like is being woke, then it follows that woke leads to cult. Therefore, it's its own kind of political cult. So that part's easy enough. Whether or not we accept those two propositions is the question. The logic is simple. Um, but let's back up a minute. What do we even mean by woke right? Because this is a term that people are unfortunately confused by. And it took me actually talking to Eric Weinstein to properly figure out why. So I was over on your island for Jordan Peterson's ARC festival that he
Yes.
puts on in February. And so I was there and Eric was there, and we had a chance encounter in kind of the exhibit hall or whatever, one of the main popular areas. And he sat down and he said that he hated the term woke right. He's put this on Twitter since, so it's not that I'm divulging something secret. But what he realized eventually is that what I had done, as he and I are both mathematics in our background, is that I had taken the concept of woke out of the left, abstracted it down to what its actual philosophical essence is, and then saw how I could apply it in other domains. And once he said that he realized that I had abstracted woke off of the phenomenon on the left, understood woke for what woke is, regardless of the left, then I can attach it to other things and see that style of thinking or behavior. You said outlook, actually, that's the right word. The word that the left uses for what they believe technically is called critical constructivism, but that's neither here nor there. They describe it as in the German term, Weltanschauung, which means worldview is one way to put it. You could say outlook is another way to put it. The way that the Ford translation of Hitler's Mein Kampf puts it is world concept. So the way that one conceives of the world. And so my claim is that woke is a way of seeing the world, seeing the political and social world in particular, and that can manifest through different channels. You could manifest that through left-wing politics, you could manifest that through right-wing politics, and you could manifest that through other politics, including libertarian politics, although that one gets a little weird. And this is my essential belief about how woke works. So we understand woke, and then you say, what's woke right? It's woke people who say that they're on the right. That's it. It's woke people who act woke, talk woke, see the world in a woke way. That's the most important part. See the world through a woke worldview. structural worldview. That's and I use the word structural there very intentionally. That's structural racism, structural this, structural that. We've heard of that for 5 years, all of us. They have a structural worldview as well, and then they do this. They channel it through right wing and sometimes conservative, but they usually distinguish between conservative and right wing. Right wing is something different. They don't tend to like conservatives. They are right wing very kind of explicitly. So they're a little more honest than their counterparts on the left who still try to pretend to be liberals, even though they openly critique liberalism and don't usually call themselves leftists. They do call themselves the left sometimes. But these guys will are openly critical of conservatism and, of course, liberalism and, of course, Marxism. And so they're the counterpart on the other side. So another way that I've phrased this is same energy, opposite direction. So woke is the energy. In fact, it's also same energy, opposite direction, same goal, which is to have a revolution by which they take control of society. So the woke left has this particular, we could call it an energy. The technical word is praxis. It has a way of viewing the world and a way of interacting in the world and say cancel culture, victim mentality, identity politics. These are the kinds of energies that they bring to the table, if we use that word kind of loosely, and they point it in a particular direction. Anti-racism, they call it. We know that it's more complicated than that and is actually enacting a biased racist uh, program. What they're really saying is they say racism is bad, but because of the circumstances, our groups can be racist and yours can't. That's what we figure out anti-racism means. Well, the woke right says, you know what? Obviously that doesn't work, but they accept the premise. The woke left says you can be racist or anti-racist. There's no such thing as not racist. So the woke right says, I take you at your word. You can be racist or anti-racist. Your anti-racist program is bullshit and ruining the world, so we're going to be racist. So same energy, opposite direction. Um, Same thing with, it's queer on the left, it's trad on the right. Same energy, opposite direction. And if you're not trad enough, or if you're not, going along with things enough, then it's a problem. The same energy of transgressing boundaries, whether we see that most visibly on the left from the sexual stuff, but also the way that the boundaries, if you want racism or fascism or Nazism to mean something, there's boundaries around what that word means. When you call somebody a Nazi, they better support the Third Reich, right? Or at least the philosophy of the Third Reich. And when the left transgresses that boundary and expands the definition, and they say, well, no, maybe the Proud Boys, so they're extreme, maybe they're Nazis or fascists or racists or whatever the word is. It doesn't matter which one, any of them. We can pick whatever ones we want. And then it's like, well, no, actually, probably the president of the United States is a Nazi. President Trump, Nazi. Like, since when, And you can just go on down the list till finally, as we all experience, they're calling everybody Nazi for the last 10 years. And so Nazi, quote unquote, doesn't mean anything. That's not actually true. It does still mean something. They've just intentionally confused the meaning by expanding it and expanding it. But that's an act of transgression against the boundary of that definition. So there's other ways that they transgress. We have the exact same phenomena going on the woke right. Again, same energy, opposite direction. So the woke left says, we're going to expand the number of genders. Then we're going to put fetishists in a parade in front of children. Now we're going to put a drag queen in the classroom. And now the drag queen performance is going to get increasingly sexual and objectionable. Now we're going to take your kids if you don't affirm it, transgressing the boundaries of normal society. The woke right says, you know what? Maybe Mustache Man was a good guy. Let's revisit Hitler. Let's transgress. The thing you're not allowed to be is a Nazi. You're not allowed to be a fascist. You're not allowed to be a racist. You're not allowed to be a homophobe. You're not allowed to hate women. Let's do a little bit of all of them. Let's do a little bit more. Let's do a whole lot more. Let's get a guy on Joe Rogan and on Tucker Carlson promoting massive revisionist history of World War II that frames out Churchill as the bad guy and Hitler as, at least ambiguous. He didn't come out and say Hitler's the hero of World War II at any point. I don't think he believes there are any heroes of World War II. The one character he doesn't talk very much about, as an aside, is FDR. But that's because the woke right has written articles saying it's time for conservatives to reclaim FDR. So they like FDR. Why? Giant state apparatus with bending the rules on how long you can hold power. That's the kind of thing they like. FDR had 4 terms. Why can't Trump have 3? They want to bend the rules. They want to, serve their own power base. So again, that coveting of power, the transgression of societal norms. Like we're going to edge into racism through jokes, and then it's not really funny anymore, but we're still going to go there. Then we're just going to be explicitly racist. You're eroding societal norms through transgression. And the same thing with definitions. I don't mean to lose that one. If the word communist means anything, it has boundaries. Well, next thing you know, all the liberals are actually communists at heart. And it just expands and expands and expands until what it boils down to is on the left, everybody except us as a fascist, a Nazi, a racist. And on the right, it's everybody except us as a shit lib, a cuck, a Marxist, a communist, whatever the word happens to be. And there's this total polarized collapsing of politics into it's not us versus them, it's us versus literally everybody, right? It's us against the world. And the goal, of course, is to take power from the center. So they attack the center. So we could go on and on, but same energy, opposite direction. It's woke people who have that energy operating as conservatives. They push opposite facing, I don't want to say values because it's not correct. Their value is still power. Their goal is still revolution that puts them in control. They have opposite facing kind of what's the right word, where it's here it is. So we'll look back at the fascists and kind of summarize. The Marxists come along, they destabilize your society. Then I'll shut up. The Marxists come along and destabilize your society, and they say we're going to get rid of oppression, and everything goes to hell because they're Marxists. And so the fascists wake up and they say, you know what, oppression was the right thing. That's what kept everything in order. So not only are we going to do oppression, we're going to do more of it. We're going to structure it. We're going to create a hierarchy. That's what fascism boils down to, in a sense, is a rigid top-down pyramidal power structure through all of society that serves the state at the top as God. So what we're going to do is we're going to enshrine the oppression that made our nation, if it's, say, Italian fascism, our race, if it's National Socialism. Something about what Germany used to be was great, and we're going to force that into being through massive oppression because, as we can see, the Marxists came to get rid of that oppression and everything went bad. So the oppression must be good. So it's not opposite values. It's like a opposite read on what makes a society work. And I mean, there's a lot of depth we could pull out that I don't want to necessarily just dive into and keep rambling, but I think that's a good starting place.
Well, let me, because again, watching this from afar, and coming at this from, I mean, as a Christian, if I believe that everyone's made in the image of God, then everyone is equal, irrelevant of who they are, their background. You may disagree with actions, but actually everyone is an equal playing field. How does that kind of fit in? Because you kind of you talk about conservatism. In Europe, there's not much to conserve. In the US, there maybe is, but in Europe, it's more going back to ideals instead of actually conserving, because a lot of the institutions and ideas have been destroyed by the state over decades. And I remember in that speech in the European Parliament, you pointed that out to them of how the woke ideology has infected society. But are you saying this is in effect a power grab with those on the right using victimhood and using the same, I guess, name calling, which what was I going to say? It reduces the
Delegitimize.
individual. I can nearly say it
There you
reduces
go.
the individual to a label, and therefore they lose value and worth as an individual. That kind of my initial thoughts on it.
Well, it's not about the label, actually. It's about cramming um, everybody in society not into a label per se. They use the label, but the point is that they're actually trying to say everybody in society who doesn't agree with us is complicit with or actively contributing to the problem, which is the degenerated society that we have now. Marxists have the exact same belief, except their location of the good times in the past is different. Marxists see the good times in the past as the model, but the good time in the past was all the way back before there was private property, back when we were communists living in our state of nature in tribes where everybody shared everything. But they were like, well, that's a bunch of squalor and poverty. So we want to keep all the good stuff. So they have this very fantastic vision where you're going to have all of the productivity of advanced society where you somehow still live like cavemen. And that's literally like their weird vision, right? But that means they're looking all the way back to the very beginning, and that's when man was really free. We didn't have society constraining us because it's very Rousseauian in that regard, right? Man is born free, but everywhere he's in chains, is what I'm referring to with Rousseau there. So they have this weird view where it's going to be living as though we're primitives, but with highly advanced, civil society. And that's the way you're going to get there is by forcing everybody to get on board. And everybody who's not getting on board is therefore classified as an enemy of the people. And there are different names. Mao used things like revisionist, landlord, rich farmer, bad element, just whatever the hell that is, right winger, and all of these things. Antifa calls them all fascists, and the critical race theorists call them all racists, and the queer theorists call them all homophobes or transphobes or whatever. We could feminists call them all men or patriarchal, or whatever. You can just it's not that hard to construct. But the idea isn't that there's just this using of a label to dehumanize. It's actually that they believe that the people who aren't on board are alienating us from our true inheritance. And that's where you see the same thing on the woke right, but they don't go all the way back to our state of nature and imagine it like in a Star Trek future, like the communists do. What they do instead of going back to the literal actual beginning at state of nature is they imagine a golden era. Hitler is a perfect example of this. If you've read what Hitler talks about the ancient Germany, it's totally made up. It's got little elements of truth, little elements of, folklore and history and all this woven in, but they were this glorious, unspoiled people and all these wonderful advances and how great they were and how much, in particular, what he was obsessed with, like Marx, was how much high culture they had. It's so much high culture. So there's this past golden era. So for the Marxists, here's the idea. Let me do this more carefully. For the Marxists, there's this idea that human beings overall are meant to be free like a bunch of savages, literally. And I use that word because it comes from Rousseau. We're supposed to be free like cavemen, wearing a groin strap and running around with absolutely no policeman to tell us what to do, no university telling us we have to have done our homework before we have an opinion that's worth hearing, and all this. But they want the benefits of society. So they look all the way back here and they say all humans are alienated from their true inheritance as a free person because of this bogus structures of society that were actually set up to benefit the property holders. That's the Marxist belief. So the property holders have therefore alienated us from who we really are and the freedom that we could actually enjoy. That's the Marxist belief. So there's this kind of essential human that's been lost and forgotten because we've been alienated from it by the bad class. Okay. And the fascists believe the same exact thing, literally the same exact thing, except it doesn't go all the way back to cavemen. They believe in a romantic mythical past with King Arthur riding through the forest on horses or whatever it happens to be, some great noble fairy tale about their own history, which is fairy tales are fine. Myths are fine, stories are fine. And, having national pride and personal pride, it doesn't matter whether King Arthur was real or not to be proud of the legend of King Arthur as a Brit or anybody else, really. It's kind of cool. Same thing with Hitler. He wrote this crazy romantic history of the Germans at some point, and then you have the people, we'll call them the Germans in this case. The people were the Germans. And then along comes all of these corruptions. And for Hitler, it was the race. So along came all these inferior races that started to water down the race, especially Jews being the most inferior and poisoning Germany's economic and social scene. In come all these interlopers. So you have a majority group that's now been dispossessed from the inheritance they're supposed to have, right? And you can point at England and say, well, shit, that's true. That's what's happening. And that's the problem, because you can take something that's true and attach this romantic nonsense to it, and then you're off doing something crazy. That's the essence of woke. They can point at the communists aren't wrong that certain people are oppressed unfairly. They're wrong about how they diagnose why that's happening and what they're going to do about it. They're not wrong that people are poor and that the bosses are trying to screw them over by paying them the smallest amount they possibly can get away with. Of course they are. But that doesn't mean that there's this intrinsic conflict between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat that is the essence of the movement of history. So the fascist side creates this bogus history of a dispossessed heritage character that the average reactionary citizen is going to be able to strongly identify with and believe we would have a good life if it wasn't for these interlopers who came in and screwed everything up. And again, remember, this is always there's got to be a huge element of truth to it, or it won't work. You can't just come in like you couldn't go in Britain today and go out on the street with a bullhorn and start yelling that it was these damn Mongolians coming in have ruined everything. Nobody would believe you. There has to be an element of truth to it, right? It has to be the managerial elite or something that they can point to that feels that it is, or the communists or whoever else have come in. And the fascists, to their credit, were right about the communists coming in and spoiling what they had. But this mythic history is the character that's been alienated from who he really is and what he really deserves. For Hitler, it was the racial German, whatever that means. For Mussolini, it was the true Italian. Again, whatever that means, because it had only been what Mussolini rises to power in the 20s. It was only in the 70s that Italy became a coherent country. Same with Germany. It wasn't really a coherent country almost before World War One. It was just kind of a bunch of Bavaria, Swabia. You have all these different regions that were not actually unified as Germany, right? There was Prussia. It was all kind of a mess. Same with Italy. It was a bunch of different regions. But now all of a sudden, Mussolini comes along and tells a story of the great Italians, or Mao Zedong comes along and tells a story, a 5,000-year history of the Chinese people. Like, which ones, And so they tell this story of a romanticized, I know he's a communist, by the way, mythic past in order to say, you as a people have been dispossessed from the inheritance you should have. Therefore, you're going to have to come together as a collective and fight for it. And there's, again, enough truth in this. It's a good sales pitch. But when you start believing that there's this weird dichotomy to life and that it's not about finding principles grounded in reality, but by joining the ideology and joining the pyramidal structure, that's when you've lost touch with the earth and you've gone woke. So I'm not a lot of get accused of some silly shit. I am not calling all Christians woke. I am not calling all conservatives woke. I'm not even calling all right wingers or isolationists or non interventionists or anything like that woke. Certainly not. Woke is a way of viewing the world that it is split fundamentally into an alienating power versus a dispossessed, alienated group that's usually a majority. Actually, the communists believe it's the people versus a small number of owners. The fascists believe it's whichever, the national or racial or whatever it is, majorities against an interloping minority that needs to be destroyed. And then we're going to get our power back, or we're going to get our inheritance back. We're going to get our heritage back. And so, like, what's the difference, say, in a country like England as opposed to, or UK instead of, say, all of Europe? Because it gets, what the hell is
Well,
Europe?
well,
Well, the difference is you guys have principles, and those principles were grounded in reality. And are you operating according to those principles, or are you operating according to a mythical vision of who you think you are, and most importantly, what you deserve, what you believe you deserve that you're not getting? That's where the grievance and the resentment come in. You believe, oh, we would have the best country if our race hadn't been spoiled by Jews coming in or whatever. That's what the Nazis. That's pretty much literally the argument of the Nazis.
Well, tell me, because again, you've got different the understanding of the US as a nation that is an idea of people coming from all over the world and populating the continent. That is a very different understanding of a nation and fairly unique. Where if you look elsewhere, when you think Japan, you think of an ethnicity. If you look at Africa, Ethiopia, it's got a long, long history. So you've kind of got most of the world kind of identity in a nation is more on ethnicity, where the US is very different. Is that a fair? I mean, how does this then concept of the woke right work in those different understandings, maybe of the nation state?
Sure. I mean, there are long expositions on what a nation is. There's a lot of argument. Nobody's actually very clear on it. And then the United States doesn't make this easier because it is fundamentally different. Um, I will go biblical for just a half second here and say, well, let's judge by their fruits. Which nation, and I get to be very American at the moment, pardon me. Which nation has done more to elevate the world out of poverty and out of sectarian conflict and international conflict than any other nation in the world? All the libertarians are like, look at all the wars you start, guys. And it's like, yeah, our CIA is a problem. I get it. And we all get it. Uh, Come on, President Trump. I just saw an article, by the way, this morning in the New York Times. It's not the CIA, but it's a bunch of bad guys from the FBI all got suspended in the last couple of days. So something's happening. Something's happening. It's been 100 days. Breathe, guys, breathe. Okay, but anyway, I digress. The idea of a nation as an idea is a remarkable departure from the nation as an ethno state, right? And so whether you're reading Stalin and Marxism and the National Question from 1913, where he goes through the first chapter, is a long discussion. It's a very interesting discussion, frankly, a long discussion of what makes a nation a nation. And he says that it's got to be. It sounds almost like if you didn't know what you're reading, it sounds like Hitler. It's a group of people in a continuous place who share a language, who have a common destiny, but also who are historically contingent upon one another. So you're historically constituted. The United States had this totally different idea, which was, why don't we say that people who want to get along under the United States Constitution govern themselves to the largest degree possible, take as much personal responsibility as they can, and be free of that kind of sectarian mindset. And in fact, the state takes an intentional hands-off approach to sectarian matters, like there's no official religion, and in fact, it's prohibited that we would make one. It doesn't matter if culturally the nation is Christian or not. The founders thought it's a bad idea for us to try to codify that. You're just going to have these squabbling denominations who are going to be fighting for power. You're going to get the same sectarian conflicts that led to the 30 Years' War and so on. And so they said, you know what? If you want to subscribe to the program of America and you want to go through the process of being self-governing and all of this other stuff, then you can be an American and we, welcome you. It's a very different idea. It's been called, and some people recoil at this, the American experiment. It's never been known if it was going to work. But one thing that is certain is that it definitely caught a stride at some point, and probably after the Civil War in particular, but some before, and really opened up opportunities, developments that the entire world has been transformed as a result of. There's something to be said, therefore, the American ethos actually has this idea, contrary to our ugly aspects of the time at our founding, that bigotry actually is counterproductive to what we're trying to do here, right? And you can read Thomas Jefferson wrestling with that, not knowing how to get rid of slavery and so on. But the fact of the matter is that there are talented people in literally every walk of life. And the goal is, if you want to have a successful and prosperous nation, you want to unleash the maximum amount of talented people working together for a common cause that you can. And the ethnic enclave really limits that. So bigotry is not really, you know, part of how we see things. Now, you said it's really funny. Maybe this is part of a blind spot for me, honestly, because you said you think of Japanese or Japan, and you think of Japanese people. And having been to Japan, like, it's visibly true.
I've never
However,
been there, so
well, you're much taller than they are. We'll start with that. You you will feel very much like their entire society was built around people much smaller than you are. It's the only place I've ever been where I felt claustrophobic, even when I was outside. Even though everything's clean and glorious and fun and nice and interesting, and the food is fantastic, everything's wonderful, but it's a little you feel like you're inside of a anime or a video game, and it's a little bit too small for life. But at any rate, it's funny because when you said that, my first thought, just being self-reflective, for the moment, was, no, I think of it as the people who live in a particular geographical area who have come together constitutionally under whatever their, legal purposes are. And we saw in World War II that the ethno thing really kind of goes bad when you have, like, the emperor of Japan is like, we're the chosen people, so therefore let's go kill like 100 million Chinese people, and try to take over the entire Pacific theater. Um, so it's like, maybe that's one of those things that we're naturally predisposed to, that if we want higher society, and that's a question, do you want high culture? Well, if you do, maybe Hitler had it backwards. Maybe you don't get higher culture by inbreeding Germans. Maybe you get higher culture by allowing people to pursue and creating conditions under which people can pursue their talents and not tear down culture because that's cultural appropriation, that's mine or whatever, or our culture is there always the best and therefore we're going to selectively promote people from within it. And so perhaps what I'm saying is that the American approach to this is a better approach because it even doesn't ask you to forego your ethnicity. We have Scottish festivals, we have Japanese festivals, we have all festivals all over the place, and everybody loves them. We want people who come from other places or who have other heritage to celebrate their heritage, but we're also going to celebrate it in an American way. So while there's going to be the caber toss at the Scottish festival, somebody's probably going to be shooting, 6-shot revolvers at tin cans or something and drinking Coors Light. I mean, I guess that's kind of British, except for the brand, but um, you get my point, though. The idea is we don't have a problem here in the U.S. with people retaining their ethnicity, having that mean something to them, that their kind of clannish nationalist sense still means something. I mean, Chinatowns are a whole thing everywhere you go. Nobody really recoils about this. Maybe some people get upset about little things, but we don't have this idea like, well, we got to cram all the Chinese people over there because they're different from us. It's like, no, come out and celebrate with us. And I don't know, I've never seen a person of a different ethnicity waving an American flag that I was mad at.
It's true. You asked kind of what my thoughts and how I see it um, from outside, and I'm trying to work it out because as a Christian and a conservative, I think that you can offer a positive outlook for society instead of enforcing it. Or,
Yeah, yeah.
and I don't necessarily, I don't think a theocracy is right. I could imagine it, but I don't think that is the way. You cannot force people.
Well,
You give them a better ideal.
yeah, just to break in, Christianity and conservatism, especially in the last 50 to 75 or maybe 100 years, and I don't buy into, by the way, these long-standing, like, I think it's very unbecoming. A lot of Christians love to pretend they're more persecuted than they are, right? Like, in Sudan, Christians are persecuted. In parts of the Middle East, Christians are persecuted. In China, Christians are persecuted, and we don't need to do anything to diminish real Christian persecution. In Britain right now, Christians are actually lightly to moderately persecuted, but you're not in Sudan, and we all know you're not in Sudan, right? And so we don't need to get all weird about it, but I say that because it's also true. I don't wanna encourage the victim mentality because there's something real happening. It is true that both conservatives and Christians, so thus also their intersection, not to use that word too glibly, have been have had short shrift, we'll say for a century, but certainly unambiguously for 50 years in Western countries. England is in particular, or UK is in particular, in a bad place. The US is in a less bad place. I get a little bit amused when American Christians talk about their persecution as Christians in America. It's like, guys, the Southern Baptist Convention has an economy bigger than Australia's. You're not doing that badly, um, just on its own. Calm down. But what I'm saying is that the conservative tradition and the Christian tradition both, values matter. Not all cultures are equal. The conservative idea in general is actually conserving the values that have worked. We go back to Edmund Burke. That's the father of philosophical conservatism. Not that people weren't conservative in disposition before that. And he's very clear that the what tradition represents is a kind of encoded summary of stuff that has worked so far. So let's keep doing it. Cultural conservatism is part of that. This culture has produced good results and we've weaned off or chopped off the parts that didn't, and that's why we should stick with it. And that's literally what Edmund Burke was talking about with conservatism. You can screw that up though and say that it was the genes, not the culture, and you're off in Nazi territory pretty quickly, right? Now, same time, Christians present, well, I'll say Jews and Christians, actually, both, because there are certain values, and Jesus said that he came to fulfill the law. There are certain values within that overall biblical belief structure that are extraordinarily pro civilization in a very unique way. I've alternately got praised and in trouble for recently while I was over on your island at ARC for saying in an interview with Justin Brierley that I believe that Christianity and Judaism are anthropologically true. I don't have to get into um, the theology or the metaphysics at all to say this shit works, right? And so when you put those together, the idea that there is a true epistemological force to conservatism, that there is a true pro-civilizational value to the Judeo-Christian structure, and that we should be able to be unapologetic in saying and conserving that in our society, and to the exclusion of other things is not a problem. In fact, it's something that we've been I think that the actual problem we face is that that has been categorized quite wrongly as a form of fascism or colonialism or, whatever other ism that they throw at it or phobia. It's Islamophobic, I'm sure, to like your own culture and not bring in people. But the fact of the matter is, like I said, what's going on with the American experiment? The idea was that we're going to flourish more by a nation that is an idea, because what it's going to allow is to bring in high talent, high culture people from the largest set of backgrounds to contribute to the program. Whereas what is happening in practice is that we've forgotten the part about high quality and high culture, right? So the saying, when you import the third world, you become the third world, or when you bring in a hostile militant religion that does not share your values, that produces backwards country after backwards country, your country is going to go backwards. And if you completely disempower the people who are saying, look, it's not about that I'm white. It's not even about that I'm Christian. It's that, or, whatever else, or that my generations go back to 1100 on the aisle. It's not about any of that. It's about people who have it's what Hitler conflated with the race. It's what Mussolini conflated with the nation. It's it's what Marx coveted but couldn't figure out how you get, is that it's people that have a high quality disposition who are working to elevate themselves and aspire not toward a bourgeois hoity-toity image of high culture, but who actually appreciate a more cultured and civilized existence. That's what brings about a higher level of civilization. Um, and we've got a lot of things screwed up away from that. But what happens in that case is people say, where did it go wrong? And Hitler is like, well, we polluted the race. And Mussolini's like, we polluted the nation. And now we have people repeating those arguments, saying that that's the issue, when the actual issue is that our leaders, either out of malice or out of incompetence, and most likely out of a healthy blend of the two, what I refer to as malice driven incompetence. The malice is behind the scenes pushing everything in a particular direction, and the incompetence and the grifters are taking it in that direction for them. Malice driven incompetence has led us to forget that it's not only appropriate, but it's good and necessary, if you're going to say admit large numbers of people into your country, that you sure bring as many as you want, as long as you screen them first to make sure that they're going to play well with what the national project is. The national project shouldn't be to be a homeless shelter for the third world. When you've decided by policy or de facto that your country is going to be a homeless shelter for the third world, your country is going to become a homeless shelter for the third world. And do you want to leave your house and go spend the night in the homeless shelter tonight? No. Why? Don't have to think very hard about why it is. And no leftist should be able to convince you that you're being a bad person for saying, no, I'm not going to go with my kids and sleep in the homeless shelter this week just to see what it's like and redistribute that. So it's the same thing, but on a national scale. So the question then is, was it, what made England great was that it was a bunch of, you know, Scotsmen or whatever? We'll poke that finger in the eye. Is that what made England great? Really poke that finger in the eye. Was it a race? Was it a national identity? Was it the empire building? Was it the monarch? Or is it something else? And what has cost it is, what is the solution? Do we go back to those coarser Again, I invoke the 30 Years' War, sectarian conflict kind of identities as a way to fight back? Or do we see ourselves as people who understand that with high principle and an eye to high civilization, then that's what you're going to get? And I think that that's got to be the key. And it's not woke to say you're letting in the third world and the third world will transform your country to garbage. And if you don't do something about it, you're going to have a major problem. The question is what you do about it. Do you lean into the ethno state, or do you say, maybe it's actually about principles?
Can I want to ask you kind of what you've faced, criticism you faced online, but I want to, one thing which I've seen with a number of figures on the right, and it's one way of how I've kind of categorized where people are coming from, is the response to Israel. I think I saw that Matt Walsh was on with Tucker, and this issue, this thinking that Israel is the boogeyman, that the Jews are the problem, and I look at it from a biblical point of view, but also you look at the history of Israel. Um, just mention your thoughts again as not as a non-Christian. It'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that discussion. I think, which has maybe
Yeah.
crept in, I maybe fairly recently, whether that's
Yeah,
5 years
fairly.
or 10, but it is
Well,
fairly recently, and Israel
since
seemed to be the
October
problem for
7th.
everything.
Since October 7th, 23 is when it's kind of crept
Yeah.
in. Really, it sort of took advantage. I've referred to I'm proud of myself that I think it was on October 8th that I said what was happening was gonna be Gaza Floyd.
Hmm.
So Israel was going to retaliate against Gaza, and what was going to happen next was you're gonna have everybody come out of the woodwork and say that Israel's a monster,
Hmm.
just like how the police were a monster for killing George Floyd.
Yeah.
And there's gonna be this huge surge into anti-Israel, and I'm going to separate these anti-Israel, and this is a lot of Jews may not like how I separate these, but I think it's important for the clarity of what's happening right now. Anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, anti-Jew,
Yeah.
and which is different, and I mean it's like outright Jew hate, and then anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to reserve the term anti-Semitism to mean the conspiracy theory that the Jews control the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't just mean that. So I'm acknowledging that I understand that, but I want clarity to talk about these different attitudes. And the conspiracy theory that of anti-Semitism is that Jews all control the world. And this is a recycled garbage piece of propaganda that has come up over and over and over again throughout history, whether in Germany in the Middle Ages, whether occasionally, as some people like Richard Poe have reported from the British Crown, when they needed to try to pull something off. The Russian czars before the communists took over are a key example. Certainly, the Nazis are the biggest and most obvious example. It's not like the communists like Jews either. So that is one aspect. There's an outright bleeding over into the other meaning of anti-Semitism, which is Jew hate, anti-Jewish, which is that, it's a little bit different. It's not necessarily a conspiracy theory at that point. It's actually blaming Jewish people. And I don't mean the Jews, I mean Jewish people as in individuals, right? So that's like where Ben Shapiro opens his mouth and they say, well, of course you'd say that he's a Jew, right? So that's something different. And then, Zionism is a political project. You can agree or disagree with that political project that Israel should be where it is and be able to build itself as such. And then being anti-Israel is different. And the reason it's different is because Israel is a state. And in fact, it's a modern state. It is the only democracy, or yeah, I guess democracy is the right word. It's the only Western style democracy in the Middle East among a bunch of what President Trump would have called shithole countries that all want it to be completely eliminated off the map from the river to the sea. For all of the people who might scream it, means from the River Jordan all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, there will be no Jews. That's what it means. Palestine will be free of Israel and Jews. So that's what that actually is referring to. So Israel, though, is a modern state. Look at what it did during COVID. It was one of the most totalitarian states over its people. It has it's a parliamentary government, but it's strongly left, strongly socialist. There are lots of things to criticize about that. Its COVID policy was not just outrageous, but horrifying. What the intentions that Israel has with Gaza now that they flattened it, if they can, finish the war, so to speak. I don't know what the right terminology I'm supposed to use for it is, but let's say that they get rid of Hamas. Let's just say that they get rid of Hamas and control the region. Some of the plans that have been floated for Gaza is to turn it into basically a 15-minute city, like hyper tech, high tech Chinese style monstrosity. That's to be criticized. That they were on board with the lockstep 2020 globalist plan is undeniable. That's to be criticized. That the Mossad, which is their intelligence service, does like all intelligence services in the modern era, especially in powerful states, that it does lots of good things for its own people in the interest of its own nation. And it does a fair amount of shady shit against its own people and other nations. Maybe it splits 90-10, maybe it's 80-20. You're British, so MI5 and MI6 aren't off the hook. I'm American. The CIA and the DIA are not off the hook. Our NSA, our entire intelligence community, the IC, MI5 and MI6 are the British ones, and the Mossad is the Israeli one. And they all do lots of good things for their people. I hear that the breakdown for the CIA is 90-10. 90% it's doing what it's supposed to do, 10% super shady. I don't know what the real number is. That's the number that I hear pretty consistently. But that super shady stuff like MK Ultra and so whatever. My favorite conspiracy theory is that the Mickey Mouse Club is a farm league for a continuation of MK Ultra. No joke. CIA controlled to get pop stars who are going to brainwash kids into stupid ideas. And I seriously think that the Mickey Mouse Club is a farm league. That's a conspiracy of my own creating, by the way. I don't know if it's true. It's my favorite one. I still think, in other words, and I don't doubt one bit that the CIA is doing shady stuff, the MI5 and MI6 are doing shady stuff, and that the Mossad are doing shady stuff. In fact, I'm certain they are. And in fact, I'm positive that they team up to do it together sometimes, right? And we saw a lot of that kind of thing in 2020 and through 2021. The vaccine program in Israel is rivaled only by the vaccine program in Japan for being the worst in the world, I think. I mean, even compared to New Zealand, I think those two are worse. And so there's a lot to criticize about Israel as a modern state in this tumultuous, globalist, whatever infected situation that we're in. But that doesn't bleed over necessarily. It's separate to the question of whether or not Jews should have a indigenous homeland in the Middle East that was allegedly granted to them by covenant with God Himself in antiquity, which is one of the bases for literally the entire religion of the West and cultural backbone of the West. And then again, Jews, and then the conspiracy theory, anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, which I urge any young people watching you, go look into it. It's all recycled. Go ask your favorite Grok or Chat GPT or AI or whatever if the tropes that you're seeing about conspiracies about Israel now are recycled garbage from like the Russian czars and the Nazis and other things that have already happened in the past. You're just getting fed propaganda that worked on people before and it's working on you now. Those are all slightly different things. But that said, what about Israel? Well, Israel, I said that I think that the Bible is anthropologically true and that it is as such, a solid guidebook for building a successful civilization. When I look at the region, I have to admit, that, okay, if that's Israel, and Israel is supposed to be there, and Israel got chased out a bunch of times by, whether it's the Romans, sent 2 millennia ago, or whether 70 AD wasn't a good year in Israel for the, or in Judea, I guess, for the Jews, or all the way up through the present day with the conflict with Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran and the whole rest, Muslim Brotherhood and so on. When I look at that, it seems to me that if the Bible is anthropologically true, we should take very seriously that having that space there as a covenantal, not ethno state, by the way, but it's not a theocracy because it doesn't force people to be Jews, but it is a religious state built around the concept of the Israeli people. So there's that, and also that as a bastion of not Islam in the region, which, by the way, isn't just Islam. It's not just Islam. Everybody's like, oh, yeah, well, Islam's a religion. Maybe it's a religion of peace. Maybe it's a religion of conquest. Maybe it's whatever. Islam means submission. We can talk about all the different things. But the fact of the matter is that the region is so effed up because the Muslims who are there, whether we're talking about the Muslim Brotherhood, whether we're talking about the PFLP, whether we're talking about the PLO, whether we're talking about Hamas, whether we're talking about any of this stuff, was all heavily infiltrated and influenced not just by Nazi propaganda, but also by tons of Soviet agitation.
Mm.
PFLP was a Soviet creation to make sure after the establishment of Israel that there would not be stability in the region. So there are massive other interests, communist interests, fascist interests that have influenced the people in that region who are vastly more radical than at some points in Islamic history. So it's a hybrid ideology that's actually there that everybody in the West has a strong interest, no matter what you think of Islam as a religion, no matter what you think of the Quran or people's ability to believe it in moderate ways. What's happening in the Middle East is a huge Soviet and Nazi kind of tag team it's like an amalgam that was forged around radical interpretations of the Quran in order to keep that region in absolute instability so long as there is a Western presence there. So if you want to fight the commies and you want to fight the fascists, you probably should have some interest in a Israel. Now, Israel as a state deserves as much criticism as any other state. So this lie that I hear every day, you're not allowed to criticize Israel. Bull crap. Almost every Jew I've talked to who didn't get like 9 shots thinks that what happened there with COVID is insane. The government needs criticism. Almost every Israeli Jew I've talked to, who's a conservative at least, thinks that their government, like every other government, deserves massive criticism and needs massive help. So this is total baloney. As a state, it can be criticized, but when you start tossing in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, then you start mixing in outright hatred for Jews on the excuse that the state needs to be criticized. Something funny is going on, and that funny in the way of queer, not funny in the way of ha ha, because it's not. And there's every reason, given that these tropes are just repackaged old Soviet or Tsarist or Nazi lines, every reason to believe that this is extremely intentional. There's another fact about all of those countries around Israel. There's an old joke. God loved Israel so much, he gave them the only plot of land in the Middle East with no oil under it. They're rich as shit. They spend a lot of money doing propaganda for their causes, and everybody knows it. There was even an article I shared a bunch of times recently in 2018, in the middle of Trump's first term, where the was it the Department of Justice? Somebody official discovered that Qatar, aka Qatar,
Mhm.
people pronounce it differently, was spending gobs of money and had at least 250 major MAGA influencers on their payroll in 2018 with the specific intent of working them up in particular directions to influence Trump and Trump's policy. So, what on earth would make you think they've stopped doing that, especially after the opportunity of Gaza Floyd after October 7th when all this exploded? It's a certainty that I don't know what number, but some people in the MAGA influencer space or the conservative influencer space, including in Europe that aren't MAGA at all, are on Middle Eastern payrolls. Iran, Qatar, Pakistan has bot farms upon bot farms. You think that they have good intentions? Egyptian, I guarantee you that there are significant amounts of money being dumped into influence campaigns from bot networks, from foreign I don't know what to call these troll farms or whatever, where you hire a bunch of people to go be pains in the asses on the internet with verified accounts because you have $600 million to throw at this project. Why not? And then just outright bought influencers or paid for influencers. And you can pay them to do something really soft, right? You don't have to, you could pay them to tweet stuff like, I love being white, which is a kind of a Black Lives Matter kind of statement. It's really anodyne, but you can't really fight against it. And it obviously causes agitation in the sense of Lenin's agitation and propaganda. So you pay these people came out at the end of the year last year, beginning of this year, they were paying people literally between $200 and $750 per post on X to post stuff like that.
Wow, it's no, it's fascinating. Really enjoyed listening to your side of that, the Israel question, the Jewish question, and
Yeah.
how that fits in. To me, it's a thread that I've seen. Um, Let's. I know that the viewers and listeners will want to jump into your feed and see the as you drop a thought in to the social media space and the response you get. It's always good to analyze where you're
It's
coming from
insane.
and your thought. I know, so I've watched that with intrigue at the anger and the vitriol that you can often get. For you just dropping in a thought and hearing the response. So I will. That could be a whole program in itself, but we'll not. I'll leave that to the viewer listeners to jump in and see that. But
I
James,
I
really
will tell
appreciate
them,
your
hang
time.
on, I'll tell them if they wanna find out more about that, not only should they go read the responses to my thoughts about any of this subject, dare to agree with one. It doesn't matter, it's the internet, if you really agree or not. Just agree with one and see what happens to you next, especially if I happen to see your agreement and retweet it. These It's like having a swarm of mosquitoes following me everywhere I go, and they will attach to you too. And you're gonna get called a Jew 1,000 times, and you're not gonna be able to get rid of them for, like, a month. So maybe you don't wanna actually participate, but if you wanna do it, try agreeing with me. Even if you don't, use a burner account. Don't spoil your good name by associating with me, and see what happens to you. It is really something.
It's a good experiment that people can take. But James, always appreciate talking to you. Thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Yeah, well, thank you again, Peter. It's always great to see you.